Rob Henderson, welcome back to Dad Saves America.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
I was listening because, as we were saying before we started the rolling, that I tend to listen more than read. Which you have a piece about reading that is inspiring and also shaming because of how much you read. You've read so many books. I was listening to your piece about influencers and about writing in the age of the influencer.
Right.
And just on a silly place to start, you started off by saying, like, whenever you go on like a podcast now, you make sure you watch first to see how different their podcast personality is,
Right? Yeah.
From their personality outside of the podcasting.
Yes.
So my first question to you is, what's the delta? We've hung out a little bit outside of this. How much weirder am I on the podcast version?
Oh, no, you're way weirder outside of the podcast. So I can tell you button down when weirdly, this is like a surreal moment for me because whenever I write, I try to write as if no one's ever going to read this thing. And when I was writing that, I thought, are some of my podcasting friends going to like text me or call me out or say like, are you saying I'm two-faced? Are you saying, fortunately, none of that has happened. But here you are asking me, am I different? And I would say you're the same. I've listened to a bunch of your podcast episodes. I mentioned to you just a few moments ago, listened to your shows with Dr. Drew and so many others. And meeting you in person, same guy. I mean, I would say that in terms of my favorite podcasters, who they are offline versus online. The online version of them is basically the same, but an extra maybe 20%.
Yeah, just a little cranked.
Yeah, just a little more enthusiastic, a bit more switched on. And then offline, it's just a bit more reserved and maybe more of an observer. A lot of commentators tend to be this way, good observers of things. But yeah, you're the same guy.
This is your second time on the show. Last time we talked about the luxury beliefs as they pertain to Mr. Mamdani's voters. Now he's running. Now he's actually running New York, which is your current home still for now, right?
Yeah, we'll see for how much longer until they ship me off to Rikers Gulag or whatever, so.
The wrong thing?
Yes. Well, they're talking about shutting down Rikers, but, I wonder if they're just going to renovate it and turn it into, the outpost for the kulaks.
A re-education camp.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Also known as a public school. One of the things that you've been writing about, and I actually want to dig into your actual work, your studies, is this notion of the sociology of the elite and of status, because it's something that I think ends up permeating a lot of our life. This like the pursuit of status and status seeking, and as the father of now two boys, one adopted, I look at the boy crisis in America and I look at the culture. I feel like I've escaped dating culture today, but the status-seeking dynamics of that world are terrifying, and I think they're having a really difficult impact on boys and girls, young men and women. So, let's just start me off with, where do you enter into understanding that as like a psychologist, and like, what's the good work? Like, who have you turned to? Where do you feel like, oh, this is actually good research. This is actually like teaching me something real. It's not sort of like high flying, unreplicatable nonsense. All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation.
Well, with things like status, weirdly, I think a lot of the most astute commentators and sociologists and observers of class and status were left-wing intellectuals from the early and mid-20th century, right? Because they saw themselves as anti-establishment, and they were often very good observers of the way that their societies worked because they had to understand it before they could erode and undermine and subvert. So if you read someone like Pierre Bourdieu, who was a French sociologist in the mid-20th century, he wrote a fantastic book called Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste. And he was a Marxist, but he was a very clear well, the writing wasn't so clear, but sort of as you read it and try to infer the ideas, it's the pieces come together. Where he was the originator of the phrase "cultural capital." So everyone is familiar with economic capital,
Yeah.
right? You accrue material resources. This is kind of wealth, and then Pierre Bourdieu comes along and says, well, what elites do is they convert their economic capital into cultural capital, sort of exhibitions and demonstrations of taste and status. And so when he was writing, 50, 60 plus years ago, he said, the elites of that day, they knew a lot about wine and artwork and exotic locations and had all this sort of intricate and arcane knowledge. And when you express this type of knowledge, you're really sort of subcommunicating that I'm a member of the elite, the upper class. I was educated at these institutions. I hang around refined social circles, and I'm a member of these groups. And when I read this, I was seeing parallels in the modern day. And this is how I came up with the framework of luxury beliefs, where a lot of the luxury beliefs are essentially expressions of cultural capital. You go through these institutions, you're raised in a certain way, you spend a lot of time around certain groups of people, and then over time, your ideas and your opinions become so far removed from the ordinary person, the mainstream member of society. And the way you get there is, you go to private schools, elite institutions. You have the kind of job that allows you to, read the right prestigious, media outlets and listen to the right kinds of commentary and hold the sort of correct opinions. And what's interesting is, because I'd mentioned Marxism, is the people who tend to express those kinds of opinions. You also see this in places like the Soviet Union. So there was a study, I think in the early 90s, where, so this was kind of, the data were collected earlier than this, but the paper was published in the 90s. But basically they found who were the most fervent supporters of communism in the Soviet Union. And these researchers found that relative to factory workers and semi-skilled laborers, people who worked white-collar jobs, who had university educations, they were between 2 and 3 times more supportive of the ideology of communism.
Shocking.
So the elites were the ones who were the most in support of this idea. So I think this throws people off of, egalitarianism, of leveling, concerns about inequality. Of course, it would be the people on the bottom of society who would share those concerns, but it's actually people who are sort of at or near the top who support a lot of these newfangled or egalitarian or revolutionary dogmas.
One of the things that I think free marketeers, and I'm very much a free marketeer, libertarian types, struggle with is not as class, just even as conceptually, because it's you're sort of starting from a place, if you're into if you're a free marketeer, like a classical liberal, of a kind of egalitarian, we're all equal under the law, we should all be able to kind of trade with each other and be left alone otherwise. So the notion of class, there isn't much of a grappling with it. I don't think the American right has actually grappled with concepts of class and the culture that binds people together in their classes. When you were coming in, the one maybe there's more than one, I'm sure, but the one notable exception would probably be Charles Murray in his book Coming Apart, which we had on the shelf, and you're like, oh, that's a great book. Would you agree with that? Do you think that this sort of grappling with class, even as a good a good descriptive analysis, has just been absent on the conservative side of thinkers and public intellectuals and discourse?
Yes, I think there's been this interesting sort of shift, though, where historically the left has been good at class analysis, dating at least as far back as Marx. And so, 100 plus years ago, when people wanted to explain differences in social outcomes, it seemed to be the left that focused on a materialist analysis. And then the right, people or followers of Francis Galton, social Darwinism, they explained it through sort of biology or genetics or something like that. Whereas now in the present, I'm almost seeing the reverse, where you're seeing increasing, especially sort of in the wake of the Trump and era phenomenon, Brexit as well, well that what explains these populist movements, and a lot of more right-leaning scholars are looking at materialist factors, analysis of class. So people like you'd mentioned, Charles Murray. I think to some extent Yoram Hazony. There are a couple of others who've attempted to use a sort of materialist lens. And then on the left, when they're trying to explain populism, a lot of it actually weirdly does seem to be rooted in this like inherent inferiority of, like we're the ones who are educated and we're the bright and knowing ones, and those people are over there are uneducated and backwards and a hopeless cause. And so it's almost this reversal. But no, I am seeing increasing numbers of sort of more right-leaning scholars who are interested in class. And within, you'd mentioned, as a psychologist,
Yeah.
are there good studies on this? Well, so a lot of the, my luxury beliefs framework and my interest in class. So you have the sociology of class, and a lot of that work comes from kind of 50 plus years ago, because I think that's when a lot of this, the best of this kind of work was done within the field of sociology. And then within empirical academic psychology, sort of modern studies, you see a lot of interesting work in terms of asking people about their interest in status and the pursuit of prestige and this kind of thing. And so there have been two recent studies. So this is sort of independent, it was a replicated study, two independent teams of researchers. And they collected data from representative samples of Americans, and they asked questions like, well, first, what they collected were demographic information. So level of income, occupational prestige, level of education, how well are you doing in your life? And then they asked people questions like, rate the extent to which you agree with these statements. It would please me to be in a position of power over other people. I enjoy when people look at me when I walk into a room. It's important for me to have influence over my peers. And so these are sort of questions intended to measure people's interest in status. And what they find is that people who are at or near the top of these metrics of income and education and socioeconomic status, they are the most likely to agree with statements like, it would please me to be in a position of power over others. And in some ways, you might think this is counterintuitive, right? You might think, well, it's the people who are poor, who are impoverished, uneducated. They're the ones who have these fantasies of, wow, it would be so great to have power. Wow, it would be so great to have influence. Wow, it'd be so great to be a person of prestige and status. But that's not the case. It's actually the opposite. It's the people who have a lot who want more. And this is there's a classic quote from Emile Durkheim, the 19th century sociologist, who said, the more one has, the more one wants, since satisfactions received only stimulate instead of filling needs. And so a lot of these people who are objectively doing well in their lives, they feel that they have to keep working, keep striving, accruing more. And I actually think in some ways, when you think about it long enough, it does start to make a certain kind of sense where you kind of need that drive to get to a certain level in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you have this inherent desire to do well in life, then of course you're going to be, we sort of at or near the top of these various hierarchies. But, this creates a problem because the people who are objectively doing well subjectively feel, well, I want more, I want more, I want more of this. This is something that Will Storr talks about in this fantastic book, The Status Game, where people generally tend to have upward social comparison inclinations. So seldom do we kind of look at our lives and then think about people who are doing worse than us and then experience this rush of gratitude. Oh, there's the homeless guy out there, or the people who are hungry or starving or suffering, and I'm doing so well. It's typically we think of, yeah, things are okay, but what about the billionaire? What about this person? What about that person? I'm still not doing as well as I should be. Why? It's unfair that someone has more than me. And what's interesting is that the people who have the strongest desire for status are also the most likely to, or rather their inclination for upward social comparison is even more pronounced. They spend even more time thinking about how others are doing better than themselves. So, I think about that with, like the Mamdani phenomenon. He disproportionate share of his supporters, college educated, doing relatively well, but they're looking upward at the multimillionaires or the billionaires or what have you. This is also a point that Musa al-Gharbi, the sociologist, makes in his recent book, We Have Never Been Woke. So in this book...
I've got that book in my office. It's in the queue.
It's really good. I mean, it's really sort of dense, a lot of academic... I mean, it's an academic press book, and it's really well done. And one of the things Musa points out in that book is that the Occupy Wall Street movement. So I'm old enough, I was 20 years old or something when that movement was in the headlines. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I was thinking, people in New York are angry at these Wall Street bankers. It's the haves versus the have-nots. It's the 1% versus the 99%. I was just sort of went along with whatever the narrative was. And what Musa points out, though, is that the majority of the protesters who participated in the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations, the majority of them had bachelor's degrees, the majority of them earned six-figure incomes, the majority of them were white. Like, they were basically, it wasn't the 99% versus the 1%, it was like the 9% versus the 1%, and the bottom 90% were just not involved at all in that conflict. So much of this, I think, is not between, the conflict is not between the haves and the have-nots, it's between the haves and the have-mores. It's between people who are doing well and people who are doing very well, and then everyone else is just not really a part of it.
So one way you could imagine that study that sort of ran in parallel, so you had sort of it replicated in two different instances. One way, and you alluded to this, that you could explain that is, well, it's selection bias. Mm-hmm. So if you are wealthy and well off, you are motivated to strive, and that brings with it a bunch of other characteristics that maybe make you more attuned to both opportunity and to relative position. If you're going to end up being going after one slot for partner, you're going to be the kind of person that cares about that and is good at navigating it if you made it to the top. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How much... This is not really a question I think that's probably answerable, but intuitively, or maybe based on other work you've done or read, how much of that is selection bias? That, hey, we have strivers, they end up being successful and they don't get tired. They just want to keep striving, and that's just how they're built. And they produce good things and sociopathic, horrible things, and sometimes overthrow the society into communism. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that? The selection bias problem, just out of the gate.
Yeah, well, I think it's not a question for me that helps to illuminate, I guess, what I'm interested in around class or status. It's, you're going to always have an elite in society. And in some ways, you want elites who are motivated and competent and ambitious. You don't want the kind of, I guess the cliche of like the fat king who's just uninterested in governing and doing the business of taking care of the territory or whatever. But at the same time, it's a problem if people are members of the elite, but they deny their membership. If they believe, they're objectively doing well, but they want more because they feel like they're not there. This abdication of responsibility or noblesse oblige, or this feeling that, you have a responsibility and a duty if you have been blessed, bestowed with, the ability to be successful, and then you are successful, now you have to look outward and think about how you can help people. What I notice for a lot of affluent and credentialed people, though, is that motive to help others, it takes the form of economic redistribution, often not for themselves, but for the people who are wealthier than them, right? So
I'm going to be charitable by
giving other people's money away.
Wanting you to be charitable.
Right.
Or you, not even you, because I'm looking at you and you'll get angry at me. Him.
Yeah, that other guy. Yeah. Well, there's the Thomas Sowell quote, he's endlessly quotable, but it's something like why is it greed to, or something like, why is it greed to want to keep your money, but it's not greed to want to take someone else's money, or something like that, right? And that is, that impulse of, I sometimes use this example of Bernie Sanders. So in 2015, if you remember, when in Democratic primaries, he was running, and he would talk about the millionaires and the billionaires, the millionaire class and the billionaire class, and how they need to pay their fair share. And then at some point in the next 10 years, between 2015 and the present, he changed his language and he only talks about billionaires. And that's because at some point over the course of that period of time, he became a millionaire.
Right.
And now it's the millionaires aren't the problem, it's the billionaires now. And so it's always the people who have more than you who need to be taken down a notch or need to pay their fair share, something like that. And so we want to have a responsible elite who, in my view, economic redistribution, it is met with very limited success, often met with catastrophic failure. And so if you want to help people who aren't doing as well, there are other ways to do it. And in my view, that involves equipping people with skills, with priorities, with values, with habits. A good friend of mine, Ed Lattimore, wrote a great book that came out last year. And in his book, he had a really tough life, tough upbringing, and he never knew his father. And he tells me the story about how, he was raised by a mom who was often neglectful and abusive. He turns 18, and he discovered that his father had sort of a life insurance claim, and he received this windfall of $50,000. So Ed, from his father. His father had passed away, completely surprised him, got this cash transfer of $50,000. And then he describes how 6 months later, it was gone, and he can't even tell you what happened. He talks about, I went to parties and clothes and, went out to the club with my friends, and then next thing I know, the money's gone. And so this is, to me, a great case study of, you have this 18-year-old kid who's been through a lot, was never taught how to manage money, never taught, all of the life skills required to build and maintain wealth and the tools required for upward mobility. You take every 18-year-old kid and give them $50,000. Like, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to lose it. They're not going to know what to do with it. And so the money is often just, when people have money, often it's just a reflection of sort of these underlying qualities that take much longer to inculcate in people. But, the quick fix, the guilt assuaging policy is just give people money and then I don't have to think about it anymore.
The phenomenon you're describing, I first heard about this from Arthur Brooks, who's a longtime friend. I was recently back on the show, but I did a whole documentary with him called The Pursuit. And he talks about how one of the sort of lab tests for this phenomenon are lottery winners. That the instance, and maybe I imagine you've come across this, but like as he explains, the instances of lottery winners, and this is not 50,000 windfall, this is millions and millions of dollars, often by people who are coming in, frankly, working class people tend to be the people that go to the gas station and buy a lottery ticket. Like I don't think I've bought one. I'm a working guy, but I don't think I've even bought lottery tickets, like ever. Maybe when I was a kid, my dad took me. They revert to the mean. Like very, very quickly. You see it a lot. You see it with rap stars. You see it with a lot of people who sort of come into this sort of unanticipated windfall. They aren't prepared for it. They didn't actually live through the experience that led to that happening and participate in it. It just happens to them. It really just happens to them, it seems like.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people who misunderstand how wealth is built, they think, it's you get wealth by having it. You give people money and then they turn it into more money and then that's it. And that explains it. But if it's true, then why, if you require wealth to build more wealth, then why aren't humans still living in caves, right? At some point along the way, we went from scraping a living out of the dirt to building things and societies and systems and perpetual wealth and so on, some societies. And, this is like another kind of classic point from Thomas Sowell is, we need, the question isn't why aren't some societies poor, it's why are some societies rich? And that's the question, that's the mystery. And I think people misunderstand this, that, you have to work, you have to have the right mindset, the right kind of discipline. One worry that I have in society at the moment is there seems to be this shift away from the practices and the habits that are attainable by just about everyone and do reliably lead to success. And the attributes that are far less in our control are becoming increasingly more valuable. So what I mean by this is, so you have, the kind of old conventional I don't know, traditional bourgeois values of law-abidingness, punctuality, respect, hard work, discipline,
The
and
stuff that the Smithsonian horrendously called like examples
like,
of whiteness. It was
okay.
like the most condescending. Like the actual
Yeah.
Smithsonian did this like list of all the things like this and many more. But
Yeah.
some stuck out as being so condescending. It's like, did nobody? How do you end up not no one objected to this being put out as being like, if you're black, you don't do these things.
Yeah, I mean it's mind-boggling that sometimes you go sort of so far into anti-racism, you circle back around, and you're indistinguishable from the racists of 100 plus years ago with these exhibits. But those values, regardless of whatever your the class you're born into, how much money you have, and so on, just about everyone can put in a little more effort, be a bit more disciplined, try to be, job interviews, make it on time, make it to your shift, all these kinds of things. Whereas the attributes that are less within people's control, things like how good looking you are. All of us can maybe on the margins look a little better, but
there's some looks maxing you can do.
Right. I don't know how many of us are
perhaps.
going to hit ourselves in the face with a hammer or the fillers or Botox or whatever, but there's still kind of a very strong upper bound to what we can do for looks in a way that doesn't exist for something like punctuality or respect or discipline, law-abidingness. And then the other thing is sort of academic ability or aptitude or intelligence or whatever you want to call it, that there's some room for all of us to improve, but it's much harder to improve on something like that than on how hard you work or how conscientious or diligent you are. But those virtues that I'd mentioned, those old virtues, are denigrated. Often if you say, maybe you should work harder, people will come at you, they'll get angry with you. They'll say it's not people's fault that they can't work harder, what have you. Whereas in the old days, you'd mentioned Charles Murray there. One of the things he points out, I think it's in Coming Apart, that if you were a young able-bodied man in decades past and you didn't have a job, people call you a bum or a tramp or a loser. And now if you're a young guy and you don't have a job, it's, leave him alone, or it's we don't understand what's going on in his life. We shouldn't judge him. We shouldn't condemn him. And, in the past, some amount of stigma and shame can motivate people to actually stretch beyond their sort of baseline willingness to work hard, for example.
One of the things that, as you were listing the some of the questions in that questionnaire about the strivers, that struck me, and you'd mentioned, you said like you were watching my interview with Dr. Drew. A common topic with Dr. Drew was narcissism, and he said one of the things he did in his work with celebrities is give them this narcissism index, which is this. Have you seen this thing? So it's this. It's a questionnaire, and it asks you questions that sound an awful lot. Because I've taken it, I was actually expecting to be more narcissistic than I was, which was very an average narcissism. It's not like you're if you're normal, you're not a narcissist. Like
there's a healthy amount.
There's a healthy amount of like self-concern and whatever. Like if you're completely like zero, then you actually have other pathologies, and you're probably like putting yourself last in ways that are really not functional. But have you looked at narcissism as a predilection and how it intersects with this, how it like might fuel the striving? And I mean, we even see this, I think, frankly, and I kind of like President Trump. I mean, I voted for him, but he's narcissistic and like to the max. He's thin-skinned, and some of it's like his superpower. So some of it drives things, and but it's like a dark force. So how do you think about narcissism and the way that plays into this striver obsession?
Yeah, there have been some studies that show a statistical relationship between narcissism and need for status, desire for recognition. And so it's exactly the direction you would predict, where the more narcissistically inclined people are, the stronger their desire for status, recognition, prestige, that kind of thing. You see this as well with, so sometimes personality psychologists will study this framework called the dark triad. And so you have narcissism and then psychopathy and Machiavellianism. And these three traits cluster together, but they're sort of still distinguishable, and they predict behavior in different ways. So, narcissism, entitlement, feeling of being superior to others. And then you have psychopathy, which is a more kind of cold-blooded, callous, unfeeling disregard for others. And then Machiavellianism, which is kind of entitled duplicity, willingness to deceive others for your own gain. And all three of these correlate with need for status. And what's interesting about narcissism is that you can. So the dark triad framework, they only look at grandiose narcissism, but narcissism, and this was an ongoing debate for decades in personality psychology about, like, is narcissism, are narcissists really just these, they're overcompensating for this inner vulnerability, and so they have this shield of high self-regard, but really they have extremely low self-esteem. And this was like the kind of classic idea around like the schoolyard bully. He's beating people up and he's stealing and he thinks he's better than everyone, but really there's this hurt little kid inside. Right. But eventually, basically, the more sort of modern studies around narcissism is that they can actually statistically distinguish between two different types of narcissism. So there's the grandiose narcissist, and grandiosity is really someone who is extremely thick-skinned, impervious to insults. They're pretty happy-go-lucky. If you attempt to tell them that they're not that great, it bounces right off of them in their mind.
I know I'm great.
Yeah. And if you tell them that they suck, they're like, no, I don't. I'm great. Like, how can you tell me that? And the relationship between grandiose narcissism and things like subjective well-being, happiness, satisfaction with their lives, and all, it's positive. The more grandiose narcissists are generally happier with themselves and their lives and how things are going. And there's a small relationship between grandiose narcissism and income. It's very small, but there's a slight statistical relationship between grandiosity and higher earnings. And then there's vulnerable narcissism, which is separate from grandiosity. So vulnerable narcissism is in many ways kind of the reverse. So they still think of themselves as the center of the universe. They still think that they are entitled to things that other people shouldn't have access to. They seek admiration, similarly to grandiose narcissists. But the thing is, with the grandiose narcissists, they will act on that impulse. So the grandiose narcissists, they want an audience. They'll go seek the audience. They'll try to build their friendships. They're more extroverted than average. Vulnerable narcissists tend to be more introverted than average. They want attention, but they fear being judged. And so a lot of their attention seeking takes place at the level of fantasy. So in their minds, they think about, oh, what if I were a rock star? What if I were a politician? What if I were someone who was beloved? But they fear so much being judged, and they're very withdrawn that they just kind of retreat. Maybe they go online instead and adopt a persona or something like that, so that when the persona is attacked, they're protected from it. And so both of these two types of narcissism share this core of desire for attention, thinking they're the center of the universe, but vulnerable narcissists are more introverted. They are more they score higher on the trait of neuroticism, more prone to negative emotion. And so you mentioned Trump. Trump to me is this classic case of grandiose narcissism. Yeah.
Gold-plated.
Yes. No, it's. I'm sure he would max out those scales. And then I think someone like Gavin Newsom is more like a classic kind of cold-blooded, like sort of psychopathic personality style, where he's very slippery. He kind of in some ways is impervious to insults or criticism and so on. But
if you Jello doesn't stick to anything. So if you just morph to whatever you need for the sake of like whatever crevice you're trying to enter.
Yeah, it just seems like there's no underlying self there. Whereas with Trump, there does seem to be some kind of a self underlying the grandiosity. Whereas with Gavin Newsom, he's so good at sort of maneuvering out of different situations. But yeah, when it comes to politicians, unsurprisingly, a lot of studies show that politicians are more narcissistic than average. Interest in politics, and this is something that I wonder about. Like, who is attracted to being a politician, it's what are you selecting for? You mentioned sort of selection effects earlier.
Yeah.
What is that kind of career path select for people who want attention, to be thought of as great, who a lot of their career relies on approval of other people? So
there's a clip from Steve Jobs
Mhm.
who I put Steve Jobs in a category for myself as people I truly admired for what they were good at and what they did. I love Steve Jobs. And whenever I say that on the show or on this channel, people are like, Steve Jobs is a jerk. Why do you love Steve Jobs? He's a horrible person.
Mm.
But I love Steve Jobs. And there's this clip from him, early days of Apple. And he's like, he was talking about how the company was growing. He's like, and we thought, we need professional managers. And so we hired all these professional managers, people with big company experience and MBAs, and they all turned out to be bozos. And it turns out the real great manager is the great person that knows how to execute things, that actually doesn't even want to manage other people. But they just they almost feel like they have to do it out of obligation to see that the work just gets done better. And so they know what it takes to make it better. And they're just one person. So they end up, they're the manager that you really want to look for. And there is a kind of like servant leader, reluctant leader thing that it's hard to try to select for that.
Yeah.
But like if you are like the boss, man, that's what it seems like you need to be looking for.
Yeah.
How does that track for you? Do you think that there's like that reluctance? Is there like a virtue or a sort of part of that to think about?
Reluctance, I don't. Maybe I definitely wouldn't trust someone who is very outwardly interested in power. And for obvious reasons. And I think this is one reason why, for example, when you look at people who are politicians, they often will downplay their own ambitions. The classic thing of, you ask, like Elizabeth Warren famously repeatedly said she would never run for president. And then look at what we saw. But if you say, I want to run for president, immediately people are mistrustful of you. And they think, well, why do you want to be president so bad? Like there's this feeling of you have to at least play act humility.
If you don't even know to play act, then you might be a darker
Right.
darker psychopath.
Yeah, or just kind of socially not very adept, and that's something you wouldn't necessarily want in a leader, right? You want someone who knows how to play the game to some extent. But when it comes to something like extroversion, so grandiose narcissists tend to be more extroverted than average, and what you find with selection for promotion, people who are more extroverted are more likely to be placed into leadership positions, but what researchers find is that there's no relationship between extroversion and actual leadership ability. So they're more likely to be selected as leaders, but as far as their effectiveness as leaders, they're no better than anyone else. But part of the reason why they're selected in the first place is because, when managers or whoever, they're thinking about, well, who should we place in this role? Who comes to mind? The person who speaks up, who puts themselves out there, who seeks attention and is unafraid of interacting with other people. Whereas those who are a bit more withdrawn or less confident or sure of themselves, they kind of step back. But when those people are placed into leadership roles, they're not any worse. They're not any better necessarily either. But all this is to say that just because someone is loud and exhibitionistic or narcissistic or extroverted, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be good leaders. But we have this bias toward people who seem to be sort of verbally adept and attention seeking, and that person should be the leader. And you see this even in small scale groups. These studies of people. You have to choose someone to represent your group in this classroom. Who do you want it to be? And they tend to choose the person who speaks, more words, or who has a louder voice, or who puts themselves out there more. So they're not necessarily indexing on, is this person an effective communicator or a competent leader? It's, well, they talk a lot. So there you go.
In thinking about those group dynamics, one of the things that I've experienced to be true, I think most of us have, but I also know that it has been studied in terms of group dynamics, like the psychology that gets put to work for like companies and stuff, is that basically one bad apple in the form of like an overly aggressive or overly loud participant can just completely wreck the dynamics of a group. And this is, I've talked to people who work in actual focus group testing, I imagine that there's similar intuition going on with jury selection. That if you want to get something real, if you want a jury that doesn't get like overly biased by one loudmouth, if you want a focus group that ends up capturing the different points of view, you have to there is like some type of person that can't be in that room because they'll just wreck it. Have you come across this stuff? And what's the work that's been done on here? Because a big part of this conversation for me is like, you've actually studied a lot of the things that I have only like bank shot bounced heard over the years.
As you're describing this, a couple of things come to mind. So one is, often when people call, office meetings or something, and they say, well, what do you think about this? And the first person who speaks up tends to be the most sort of bold, extroverted person. And often other people are reluctant to challenge that person. And so you start to sort of see this slow drift toward groupthink. And this can be dangerous. So often the advice is, people should submit their ideas anonymously or write them down first and send them to the manager, whoever's running the meeting, so that they have a sense of what people are thinking instead of just going into the meeting. What do people think? Well, the people who may have a good idea, but they're just shy or reserved or less confident in themselves. They're not going to be the first to speak out. Whoever speaks first often has disproportionate sway over how that conversation goes. The other thing, as you're describing, I think about is sometimes there's this debate, this confusion around these two ideas. So one idea that people will often hear is the wisdom of the crowds, right? Like if you want to know what the truth is, you survey a large number of people, and then they kind of converge toward the truth.
It's like the social law of large numbers kind of thing. It's not the same thing, but kind of.
You ask people questions like, what's the distance between New York and Boston? You ask one person, you're going to get the wrong answer. But if you ask 100 people, they'll kind of converge on roughly the right answer. And for sort of empirically true questions, or questions with an empirically correct answer. And then the other idea is the madness of crowds, right? Like actually one person can be rational in isolation. You ask them a question and they'll be thoughtful and logical and rational. But then once you get a group together, then they lose their minds, and then they're no longer as smart as any individual person within that group. So how do you reconcile the madness of crowds with the wisdom of crowds? Because they both have some element of truth in them.
Yeah.
And the idea here, and this comes from Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and this other book called Noise. If you want to tap into the wisdom of crowds, you actually have to solicit their views anonymously. If you solicit their views publicly, all of these other incentives come into play. If you ask anonymously, the incentive is to tell you what I really think, try to get at the truth. If you ask me in front of everyone else, now it's, well, there's the truth motive, but then there's also, well, how am I going to look if I say this? What are these people going to think? How's my reputation going to change? So you have all of these other things competing along with that motive for the truth. And when the madness of crowds comes into play, that's when people start to lose their minds, and they're performing for their friends, or they're trying to manage their reputation in some way. So I think this is actually like a very good piece of actionable advice, is if you're soliciting people for their advice or their thoughts or something, it's better to do it sort of away from crowds, preferably one-on-one or anonymous, or in a way that they don't have to be worried about how they come across to others. And this is one reason among others why, like voting is private, for example. If people had to vote in public, or they had to show their vote, or I could look up who you voted for online, politics would look very different.
This sense of like the force of being watched or being seen, like if you're being seen, it's like almost like the quantum mechanics of the social world. Like if as I understand it, in quantum theory, like particles will be different on the basis of being observed, and people are the same way, for sure. We act differently when we're being watched than when we're not. Is that at the heart of status and status seeking? Is it like at the most basic level? How do you understand right now, like, why anyone cares about status? Like, status is just an opinion. It's not like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, there are materially different positions people can occupy, but to be concerned with the abstraction of that, rather than like, I want that guy's job in my firm. That's weird. Like, it's weird to care. It's weird to care that Elon Musk, who you've never met, never will meet, has more money than you. Like, who cares? So, like, at the most basic level, is it evolutionary psychology? Is there somebody that's got the most plausible explanation for this that doesn't just sound like hand waving?
Well, there's a terrific book by the late anthropologist Christopher Boehm. The book is called Hierarchy in the Forest. And this book is essentially a survey of small-scale, pre-industrial hunter-gatherer societies, what people in a less politically correct time would call primitive societies. And in these societies, what this book points out is that there is a strict kind of leveling mechanism where, like, basically they're extremely egalitarian, at least among the adult males. The adult males are extremely egalitarian. They do not like when anyone thinks of themselves as superior to any of the others. There's one story he points out of he reports this. There's different anthropologists, but he's reporting this interaction between this anthropologist and one of the sort of the elder men in this community, this sort of nomadic hunter-gatherer group. And he says, whenever one of the young men successfully takes out a large animal, all of the other men will start to mock him and make fun of him, ridicule him, say, oh, like, you're so proud of yourself for killing this small little thing. And they start to tease him. And this elderly man says the logic here is we don't want him to get a big head. We don't want him to think of himself as better than anyone else because this can be dangerous. They say, when a young man thinks of himself as superior to others, then he'll try to sleep with the other men's wives, or he'll try to take more meat than we believe he's allotted to. And so there's this desire for relative equality. The other thing is within nomadic hunter-gatherer communities, it's very difficult to stockpile resources. If you're constantly on the go, you can't carry that much by hand with you. And so we did not really evolve in an environment of sort of ostentatious wealth, of any one person having so much more than anyone else.
Yeah, it was a zero-sum world.
Yes. Yeah, and anyone who did acquire a large amount of resources, they were expected to distribute and share. So there are cases, generally speaking, they were relatively monogamous hunter-gatherer societies, but occasionally, some of the more successful men, the better hunters or something, they might get an extra wife, but those people who people bestowed extra status or respect to, they were expected to be extremely generous with material goods. Like, they were actually expected to give more away. If they, acquired money, or not money, meat or seashells or anything that the other group members desired, they were supposed to give it away in a very conspicuous manner. And so it does seem to be the case that we have this innate kind of preference for egalitarianism, but it's in tension with the desire to stand out and to get ahead, because even within those hunter-gatherer groups, someone who was extremely well respected or admired or successful, they would win over more allies. They would be more likely to acquire a romantic partner. They'd be more likely to have children. And they would, and the children of high status members of these groups were more likely to survive into adulthood. And so, there's this constant desire to level ourselves up, level other people down, and generally egalitarianism is not. The way that Christopher Boehm explains it in the book is it's not so much that we all love equality, it's that equality is this uneasy compromise of, if I can't be number one, then you can't either. And so we both have to sort of sit in this kind of tension of being equal, roughly equal. And so as a result of this, we see this tension play out even in the modern world of people who want to do well for themselves, but then they get envious when they see other people doing better. And they have this leveling instinct, this kind of envy of others. And the other interesting thing about the study of these small-scale societies is this terrifying fear of envy. It's a great book from the 60s.
Fear of envy.
Yeah, the fear of envy.
So in yourself, be afraid
no, other people's envy.
Oh, okay. So, so okay, I got you.
Yeah. And so the
fear of other people being envious of you. Like, just watch out, because if the tribe gets jealous, the tribe gets jealous,
yeah.
you might wake up with your hut burning.
Yes. And seriously. There's probably the best book on envy is by Helmut Schock in the 1960s. And he points out that in a lot of pre-literate societies, there's this fear that people, they call it the evil eye. Like I might attract your envy, I might attract the evil eye, so I can't stand out or think of myself as any better than you. Even cases of if someone has an especially good-looking child, they'll rub dirt or soot on them so as to avoid other people thinking like, oh, you have a better child than us, a beautiful child. And because there are cases of if you make an enemy and then they're envious of you, they may disfigure your kid, something like that. And so, and that's a real sort of ugly instinct that fortunately not all of us have, but enough people may have that in them that we become very careful about our good fortune. This is something Adam Smith talks about this, right? That
in the theory of moral sentiments, and I mean, Russ Roberts brings this to the foreground for sure in his books about him. But what were you going to how do you remember Smith's take on it?
Essentially that you should be very careful with sharing good news about yourself, right? Because you could potentially attract the envy of other people. So he says, the reason why people downplay their good fortune is because when someone experiences spectacular success, other people are often not particularly happy for them, so they'll downplay the success. And we can sympathize with people's small successes, small victories we admire in others, or we're happy for others. If it's a outsized success, then it's well, why do you get that and not me, or what did you do to deserve that? And then it's interesting because Adam Smith says it's the reverse for misfortune, where if you experience a small misfortune, people don't care. But if it's a large misfortune, then suddenly people are invested and they're sympathetic and so on. So you get this sort of asymmetry of responses. And this is why people downplay their success and magnify their misfortunes, right? Where people will sort of humbly say, "Oh, I did this great thing," but they don't want to brag too much about it. But then if something kind of unfortunate but not catastrophic happens, they will kind of embellish it. And that too, to me, I think is connected with envy. That if you can talk about how bad things are for you, then people won't be too interested in kind of ruining your life further.
What these tribal impulses just remind me of is how hard our moment in time is. Mm-hmm. And you could define that in a couple different ways. You could say our moment as in like this decade or this 250 years, which is like we have entered this period of such extreme change. And like we were so far away from the sort of simple zero-sum world that occupies like 99.9% probably of like human existence as a Homo sapien on planet Earth. It's like it's amazing we're still here. You'd mentioned like Soul saying, we don't have to understand,
poverty.
Poverty. We need to understand how anybody escaped poverty.
Right.
Like how did wealth happen at all? Because poverty is actually the default.
Yes. And I think that what you just said, that 99% of our human history, we scraped a meager existence out of the dirt, nomadic societies, hunting, going from place to place, never developing technology or stationary societies. I actually think a lot of that is rooted in that leveling instinct of envy, of not wanting to do better. And one of the reasons why we were able to shift from a zero-sum world to a positive-sum world is finding ways to manage that feeling of envy. There was a really funny study years ago. They looked at contestants in the game Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And for the listeners, there's this ask the audience lifeline, where if you don't know the answer to the question, you can survey the audience. And in the U.S. version of this game, these researchers found that more than 90% of the time, if you ask the audience, you'll get the right answer. Whatever the majority answer is, they give you the right one.
Also, so they're actively trying to help you.
Right. They want, Americans want to see their fellow, this other person be successful.
They want to win the game.
Yes, we get happy for them, right? They looked at the Russian version of this game, and this was in the 2000s, so this was not, in the communist era, but in the 2000s. And in the Russian version of this game, they found that participants often didn't even use the lifeline because the audience would tend to give them the wrong answer. And what's interesting to me is like that to me, so, in this case, you might think the obvious question is, well, why would they give them the wrong answer? To me, the question is, why would you give them the right one? This is a stranger. Why do you care if they make more money? Why are you trying to help them? In some very sort of cold, evolutionary, Machiavellian kind of logic, it would actually benefit you if someone is not doing better than yourself, right? Like actually cutting them down, preventing them from winning. In some kind of zero-sum world, that's actually the right move.
There's more for you out there to be had
somehow,
now,
right? Or this person, there's one less person who is better than you, right? But in America, and up until very relatively recently, wealth-generating countries, successful cultures that have developed technology and societies and advancements and all these things, they have found ways to stigmatize envy and to promote gratitude and happiness at the success of others. And we've kind of created this norm, I think, in our culture of, even if on some level inside you feel a little sting of envy, the right thing to do is at least outwardly express happiness for the person. And I think like that is kind of an underrated cause of success in Western cultures and America in particular.
I do think that is a practice too. There's a cultural element that I'd love to talk more about, but I think on a personal level, I try to actually do this. This is often a little bit of a mantra. When I hear somebody did something great, especially if they're like in the same general zone where it's like, I could be seen as not even competitive, just but comparative. Mm-hmm. Somebody got like some awesome movie deal or something. I don't know. I try to do a mantra of saying, that's awesome. I'm happy for them. I'm grateful for them that they've had that success. Good for them. That's the best. Like, and say it, because it is dark. It is dark to let that envy sort of come into your mind. You're like, well, why didn't they? I'm better than them, or at least or maybe I'm not better, but they're not actually that good. Like,
that's right.
Whatever.
We've all had those thoughts. Yeah. No, it's
like,
yeah.
Oh, that book is above mine, or man, I did that same video and theirs is 1 million views, mine has 50,000. Like, why do they get all the attention? This is like a question that's been rattling around for me throughout the conversation, and we'll keep coming back to it. But I want to ask it now, and we can keep coming back. But there is one of the things I think has become very difficult, maybe more difficult, maybe. It's not clear that it's more difficult, it feels more difficult, is to have a healthy identity that actually is rooted such that those things don't destabilize you. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, like, for me, like, becoming a dad was this super powerful moment, because I loved it. I was excited about it, for one thing. And it's okay to be scared, or even to be like, I don't want this, or whatever. It's like, everybody comes at this stuff differently, and it's hard. But I was super excited. And then when my son was born, I had this weird experience that I've talked about a lot, which is like my ambitions sort of changed. They actually muted for about 6 months. Wow. Where I didn't feel like the work. I was working at Spike. I was a creative director. It was like a pretty exciting job. I mean, I was doing something I love to do. But I was like enamored with him and the whole thing, with my son. And when I recalibrated, I actually was like a more risk-taking, more not afraid to lose kind of person. Like, it changed me in a way that no one sort of prepared me for. And the way what I attribute to that, and maybe this is ex post storytelling, is like I now had something about my life, a kind of who am I, what am I, an answer to that question that was just completely immune to material success, or did I win that contract? Did this video succeed or not? Like, none of that impacts. None of that has anything to do with whether, like, I'm a good dad or whether my son is happy and healthy. And it became a kind of like F you money. You know, we just had this phrase like F you money. Like, you have enough money, you don't care. You can walk away from any deal. Like, you can always say no. that was a thing for me in becoming a father, that like that it actually gave me a kind of like a new identity that let me say, I'm going to walk away from that. That's not, I don't need to do that. Or I don't care that I lost. I don't care that I screwed up and made a fool of myself. I don't care that I started the podcast and couldn't remember the question. Like, it doesn't matter. You've been through a lot, and I'm monologuing a little bit, but like in your book, your life experience, you start off in, foster care. You go through this troubled life. And now you're somebody who's stable, appears to be stable, got a successful book, you're doing good stuff. How do you think about your own identity and like, how do you, like, maybe what's even your advice for people struggling to like pursue an identity or identify something that can be insulated from all these bad impulses we have and all the social stuff that's all toxic and horrible?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's this, I guess, you'd mentioned earlier sort of ex post storytelling. I feel like I might be in danger of whatever I say, it's always going to be, flawed retrospective thing. But, I think when you're young, it's wise to just try out different things, see what you're good at, see what you're drawn to. So for me, writing was something that I always had an interest in. When I was a little kid, I read a lot of books. And then as I got older, I would, have like journals, and I would think, and it was something that I was naturally drawn to. And, just try out different activities, see what fits with your personality and your inclination and what you might be good at. And then, as you get older, try to focus on those things that you're finding success in. But yeah, it's a constant struggle. Because initially, I think a lot of people want the shortcut to success. They want the overnight kind of recipe of, okay, well, how do I get from here to there without all of the work in between? But a lot of it is just sort of trial and error. There's this idea of explore versus exploit, depending on, at least with regard to lifespan, depending on where you are. So explore is essentially trying to discover what you enjoy doing or what will maximize the payoff given your effort. And so you're trying out lots of different things, novelty seeking to some extent. So, with regard to the lifespan, this is why infants will put everything in their mouths. They're in exploit mode where they don't know when they're going
explore
to...
mode?
Explore mode. That's right. Yeah. Explore mode where they don't know. Like any individual, they put, a button or a knickknack in their mouth. They don't know if they're going to hit the lottery. That might be the jackpot. That might be the best thing they've ever tasted. They don't know. And then over time, you get sort of locked into your preferences. And then as you get older, people go into exploit mode, which is now I know what I like. Now I know what I'm good at, what I enjoy doing. And as you get older, hopefully, if you've lived a rich and varied life, you'll have a few of those different things so that you don't place all of your value into any one of them, like what you're mentioning here with being a father and your career and all of these side interests. And so, you start to have sort of different priorities. And if one of those things goes wrong, well, you have your son and your identity as a father is the main thing. And so, yeah, I recall reading this very interesting study, speaking of family and explore versus exploit, years ago, which was when you ask people question of would you rather have dinner with your favorite author or with a member of your family, unsurprisingly, younger people say favorite author, and older people say member of my family. And the reasoning here seems to be, well, when you're young, it's, you have the whole world ahead of you. You have your whole life ahead of you. How often are you going to get to meet with your favorite author versus, dinner again with some member of your family? But as you get older, you value those relationships more and you don't know how much time you have. So you want to maximize, the time that you experience with them. But when you prompt young people to say, you have 6 months left to live and now you have an option, favorite author or member of your family, that you haven't, I think it's a member of your family you haven't seen in a long time, then the priority changes. If you ask them to imagine 6 months left, then they say member of the family. That's more important.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so I think this is kind of shows that with age priorities change, and then you want to sort of lean into what you want, whereas when you're young, test out various options.
The other dynamic I'm curious how much, I mean, you've talked about the dating and relationships and stuff for young men, and this is kind of a way into that. How much of these dynamics are just like sexual drives, like mating and the dynamics between men and women to pair up that gives rise to a lot of this social behavior stuff? Like, we have to like pair up to survive and to continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't used to think about this all this much outside of like wanting to find a girl. But as a father, as an American, at looking at the dating market stuff that I've escaped. Thank God. Hope to never to return. It seems like sexual dynamics between men and women is like sex sells, but it also maybe drives everything. Like, how do you think about that? How do you think about what's academic? What does academic kind of psychology understand about like how big of a role like mating impulses are in kind of everything? And then just like more broadly, just how is it the changes going on, like kind of warping us?
Well, I think I think this also is sort of dependent on age, where you see online who's driving most of the discourse around dating. It's kind of people in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and older people who are already paired off and have children and grandchildren, and they sort of exited that stage of life. It's less of a concern. I mean, everyone to some extent is interested in relationships and sex and all that kind of stuff. It's naturally appealing to us, which I think in part for evolutionary reasons. Sex is such an important part of life, but the people who it's their main priority, there is an evolutionary impulse there where there's this unbroken chain. You consider yourself on Earth in the year 2026 all the way back to the first amoeba. There has been endless cycles of reproduction to arrive at your existence today. And you think about your human ancestors, they were still finding ways to have sex during famines and wars and ice ages and disease outbreaks and everything else. Still, the drive for sex was so powerful that they managed to reproduce. And so, that motive is instilled in us. So, it's a part of everything. In some ways, I think it's interesting that so much attention is paid to economic incentives, which I think is important. But, for a lot of people, economic incentives are, only important insofar as they can aid them in their quest to find a partner, right? So, I'm speaking here mostly about younger people.
Yeah.
Why do young people work so hard to get educated and get a job and be successful and so on? Well, they're hoping that they can put themselves in a position to find a high quality partner, to have kids. But that motive, the mating motive is, I don't know, it makes people a little more uncomfortable. It's less spoken about, and talking about economic incentives feels a bit more removed from that and a bit more sort of, I guess, clinical or I guess less tawdry or something. But yeah, the sex thing is, I think, because fewer people are successful at it, it's something that's a topic of conversation increasingly online. Young guys, I'm sure you've seen some of the stats on this, John, of about half of men between the ages of 18 and 25 have never asked a woman out on a date.
Yes.
And the numbers of young people, and this is work from Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge, of up until kind of the rise of the smartphone era, around 2009, 2010, the numbers of 12th graders who had gone on a date or had a relationship or had had sex, they were kind of steady. I think it was like 50, 60%. And then around 2010, the numbers plummeted, and now it's kind of 20%, 30%. It's kind of cut in half, and increasingly larger numbers of young people are just kind of out there adrift. What I'm noticing, and this is not based on data, is my kind of, I guess, vibes. Among young guys, I don't. It seems like being an incel is not really that stigmatized anymore. Where like if you're not getting laid, it's not that big of a deal. What people want to avoid, what sort of lowers your status, what's stigmatized is caring. So if you're an incel, you're like, yeah,
don't
I'm not
catch
getting
the feels or whatever.
No, not well. It's related. It's more so.
I'm sure I miss you. I'm sure I'm being cringed by saying that. I know. I'm always cringed.
We're gonna get unk in the comments section, but it's not so much like oh, you don't get laid, what a loser. It's yeah, I don't get laid. Oh, that's cool. But if you say I don't get laid and God, it sucks, and why are women like, and once you start to care a lot, then it's like, dude, calm down, chill out. Like, why are you being weird? So not getting laid is okay, but complaining about it is the thing that people don't like now.
That's different from when I was growing up.
Right. Where it's always like,
those of us
you have a
that were
girlfriend
nerds,
yeah.
and couldn't get women until we sort of came into our own.
Yeah.
It was just like it was the central. I mean, I can remember this. I can remember quite with a lot of clarity the feeling in middle school rising into high school, and high school especially.
Yeah.
It's like it dominates. Like if you as a guy.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a girlfriend, you wanted a girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And if you couldn't find anybody in your school or elsewhere that liked you enough and that where you, it sucked. It was like, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't anybody like me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I like hanging out with my buddies, but like, this is like, and then your buddy gets a girlfriend. You're like, what? Like, oh,
you know, it's so fun. I think like and I've thought about this, like the kind of cultural impact of Me Too, where now you're seeing guys who are just normal, who are afraid of being accused of anything, harassment, coercion, intimidation. And I think people misunderstood what young guys are actually like, where we overinterpreted. Yes, there's some small percentage of predators out there who are emboldened, probably high on the dark triad, who are immune to laws, shame, stigma. Like they're going to be predators regardless of whatever barriers you put in front of them. But the average guy, when they are repeatedly told about toxic masculinity or all the stuff around respecting women, or young guys are the problem, the future is female, all that kind of cultural messaging, I think over time, the average young guy is like, I guess I just got to like kind of hang back and like not do anything. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, walking on eggshells, that kind of thing. But, when I think back to my own high school days, like the average guy needs sort of everything in place. Like it's actually in some ways amazing that people ever pair up at all. Like I think about my best friend from high school.
Relationship is the relationship version of the Thomas Sowell quote. How do we know? We don't have to understand being
incels.
Being an incel.
It's getting laid. That's the quick.
How do you ever get laid? That's really what you need to understand.
Actually, that's that there might be an essay in there. I might borrow that one, John.
Steal away, my friend.
But the story, I think I alluded to this in Troubled, but I didn't get to tell the full story, which was my best friend in high school. I lived with him our senior year. He'd had a crush on this girl in our class for ages. She had a crush on him. We knew from her friends. It was like the classic thing where his friends were talking to her friends, like, hey, so-and-so has a crush on so-and-so. Oh, well, she likes him too. All this sort of whisper. And then I tell my friend, and then her friends tell him, and then my friends tell her. Everyone's rooting for everyone, for these two people to get together.
Impossible scenario.
Finally, my friend, he goes up to this girl, and I'm kind of standing 10, 12 feet away, like trying to be nonchalant. I'm sure she thought I was eavesdropping, but I hear him saying like, hey, so, our friends have been talking, and like, I guess I should just tell you I like you. And then I could hear it. He said something like, I can't believe how hard this is for me. Like, and she's encouraging him. She's like, and he says like, I want to ask you something. And she's like, it's okay, you can ask. And he was like, I don't know if I can. He's like, all of the energy, the emotions, the apprehensiveness, the nerves of, your typical 17-year-old boy asking a girl out for the first time. And finally he asks, will you go out with me? Will you be my girlfriend? Something like that. And she says, yeah. And that was when like everything was in place, everything was locked in.
Why are you nervous?
Still, right? And
why.
He's still nervous, right? And now you can imagine the opposite, where like, a 17-year-old boy is repeatedly told like, hey, like don't bother women, leave them alone, don't talk to them, like you're a toxic male, and so on. And then of course, like I guess, and then, the thing that I didn't have in high school that every young boy has now is like this high-speed dial-up, or what is it, like high-speed digital internet, all this stuff where you can kind of have this cheap substitute for sex. when I was a kid, it was dial-up when I was a kid. I think we'd gotten high-speed internet like later. I think I might have been an adult.
Yeah,
already.
it was like,
yeah.
at 1 a.m. getting a, flathead screwdriver to try to get the cable thing.
This is before my time.
Yeah, I know. I'm like boomerish here. That was the like pre-internet teenage life in the 90s.
Yeah.
And the 80s, 90s.
So by the early 2000s, it was like I had one friend whose parents had cable, and it was like midnight on a Saturday, HBO would have like they would play the shows with like nudity and stuff, and it was like the whole day we'd be anticipating, when does that show come on? Yeah. Like when does this? Yeah. And now like
we'll watch Tales from the Crypt, and then there's gonna be some nudie thing.
Yeah. And now like I think it's a real shame, like guys who, you're a teenager and you're getting this cultural messaging on the one hand, and then on the other, you're still having all of the kind of crazy hormones and everything that goes along with puberty. And so, just look at a screen, look at, whatever or something, and that'll be your, way to satisfy that. And you're sapping yourself of the energy and the motivation to go out and pursue a real relationship. Sometimes I draw this analogy to like cooking a real meal versus just like ordering McDonald's on Uber Eats, where one of those is really easy to do. And in the moment, it feels really good. And then you kind of feel gross afterwards. And then with, cooking a meal, it's a lot of effort. It's hard work. You got to get out there. You got to gather things. You got to, whatever. It's just a much more of an ordeal. But then the process, and by the time you're finished, you feel satisfied with it. You're proud of yourself for what you did. The meal is good. It's nutritious. You feel good sort of physically and psychologically and so on. But the barriers are harder. And without the stimulation, the motive of hunger, you're not going to do that. And if that hunger can be quickly satisfied with McDonald's and Uber Eats, then you're never going to go out to the grocery store and do
that. Something that's coming to mind is that there's a connection here which is between like luxury beliefs and this like striving, jealous bunch of elite jerks that tend to topple societies, from French salons to the Bolshevik Revolution to the mayor's race in New York City, and these other dynamics with boys and easy access, and that is like the pathologies of comfort. That there's something about comfort and ease that we are not really built, we are not adapted to be healthy in any definition of healthy that you'd know it when you see it. For pure comfort. Like, I mean, and there's other examples of that. Like people people who retire, I might misquote this exactly, but it is something like the incidence of dying quickly after ceasing to work for a lot of men is pretty high. Like you need to be useful, and when you're not useful, you just like die. You just give up at a certain age, and is that a way to think about this? How do you think about our relationship to ease and comfort psychologically? Because it feels like we're not built. Like, it's a really hard thing as a parent, and just as a functional person, because the comfort hits us all in different ways. Stuff's getting easier. There's plenty of stuff that's hard. Stuff's expensive. I'm not trying to downplay people who are struggling, but there's a lot more comfort in this society objectively than there was in prior times in human history, and we have weird pathologies that actually are on the rise relative to prior times. Why do you think that is? And are those things kind of connected?
Yeah, there is this, the problems of scarcity, but we have the problems of abundance. And these are new problems. Up until very recently, every society was sort of on the margin of poverty, on the edge of death.
It's like we have social diabetes.
Yeah. And this is, something I remember I was at this talk years ago, and someone asked Jordan Peterson, "What are you optimistic about?" And he says, "More people are dying of obesity than starvation." That yes, obesity is a problem, but you'd much rather have the obesity problem than the starvation problem. And you may not get to choose, right? You may not get to choose the optimal level of whatever the problem happens to be. You either get the problems of scarcity or abundance. You're not going to have a society with no problems. But you do see, when you look at sort of big data sets of levels of anxiety and depression, those are concentrated in and rising in rich first world developed societies. Those are the countries where people are suffering from, a sense of aimlessness, meaninglessness, lack of satisfaction. And in some ways, I wonder if this is when you are living in scarcity, the meaning is built in. It's survival, and every day you survive is a victory. You can go to bed at night thinking life fought me and I fought back and I won today, and that's enough. My family's okay, I'm okay, and we're good for now.
Not today, grizzly bear.
Right. Whereas, in a society where survival is guaranteed, and now you start to look outward at other problems or maybe inward, and there are all these other things that are much less manageable in some ways. Like survival, it's clear cut. It's like, did you eat or did you not eat? Did you get clean water or did you not? Whereas in a wealthy society, the problems are harder to define and the solutions are as well. And it's not always clear sort of what will make you feel good about yourself or what will help you. I sometimes think about this with regard to kind of differences in what people's priorities are. So, like the universal basic income idea, I think that if you are a naturally kind of creative or intellectual person who can find meaning in your hobbies, or you can find meaning in travel or in creating something, if you're that type of person, then a cash transfer to keep you alive while you're indulging in those curiosities or preferences, that wouldn't be so bad for you. But most people aren't like that. And I think for most people, the meaning is actually in providing for themselves by fulfilling their own basic material needs. And if you do that for them, then you've narrowed the number of possibilities for them to feel proud of themselves, to feel a sense of pride and self-satisfaction and so on. And once you do that for them, and they are not particularly, talented or creative or ambitious or what have you, then they're just stuck. Well, I have everything I need, and now I feel like useless, and I can't take pride in providing for myself. I've pointed this out with like when you look at how people like unemployed and jobless people spend most of their time, most of it is in front of screens. They're watching TV or gambling or surfing the internet or looking at. And when you look at people who recently lost their job, who spend a lot of time at home, they're not doing anything particularly exciting or interesting or creative. This is like the old Marxist idea of once you give everyone money, then you'll unlock all of these creative energies. And
it's in the same category. It's not in quite the same category as believing that there's no differences between men and women in terms of like, don't trust your lying eyes utopian nonsense, but it's not that far off from it.
It's a kind of a misunderstanding of human nature. And so there's a really interesting finding that if you look between the 1960s and the 1990s, Americans gained something like an extra 6 hours of leisure time per week. So that's roughly 300 extra hours a year. And almost all of that time was filled with watching TV. So you might think, 300 extra hours. Well, did more Americans learn another language? Did they learn calligraphy? Did they, invent something? No, most people just watch TV. Probably now, it would be scrolling Instagram or something. But for most people, I think it's the struggle and the effort. And there's this very popular psychological concept of flow. Maybe you've heard of it.
To get into the flow state.
Yeah, the flow state. I read that book.
I haven't read the book. I'm curious to read it because I know what it feels like. Because I know what it feels like to zone. For me personally, the post-production processes, like editing. I've actually I've edited video since high school, and I like it's one of those things where I'll start working on something like that. And next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and Yeah, I maybe had a couple of too many, extra coffees or whatever. But I didn't even need them, and often I don't. Like if that flow state is like you're just in and you're just going.
So what you just described to me, it reminded me. I had a conversation with my barber a while back, and he said that the exact same thing. Where, he'll do this thing, and then the next thing he knows, he looks up and the sun is down and it's 3 a.m. and the activity he told me was TikTok. He says, I'll open TikTok he's like, man, I'll open TikTok and the sun is out, just after dinner. And then I look up again and it's 3 a.m. and everyone's gone to bed and I'm like alone in my living room and realizing like I need to sleep.
The CCP won that
day. Yeah. Well, and so on the point of flow in the book, the author, he was Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he shares these data around when people feel most effective. So if you ask people, would you rather, do you feel that you would rather work more or less? And just generally attitudes around like having to go into work. And in response to these types of questions, most people say like, I don't really like work. I don't want to work. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just be more leisure time, right? Most people want more leisure time. But then when he asks, when do you feel most effective and when do you feel most satisfied? What points during the day and what points during the week? And people overwhelmingly say, when I'm at my work, when I'm at my job. And so there's this conflict here where it's almost like before and after going to the gym, right? Before the gym, no one wants to go. And then after, it's like, did you feel effective? Did you feel good? And it's like, yeah, I'm glad I did this thing. And I think it's similar with work where people, ideally, they have this, this preference for leisure time. But then when you actually look at people's leisure time, it's spent, 7 hours on TikTok. They don't feel particularly good about themselves. And they actually feel better when they're at work, when they're engaged, when they feel like they're being productive, when they feel like they're making their way in the world. But as societies grow wealthier, that's a challenge we'll have to find ways to address.
One of the things about your life path and the way you, and what you talk about in your book is, along the way towards who you are now, you went into the military, and it's a very costs and benefits story. But what did just looking back now, having not had habit formation that would be healthy prior to that? I think that's maybe a fair characterization. Is that maybe like a anodyne way to describe the period, perhaps? But this idea of habit formation is I'm kind of bad at thinking about this practically in that I'm one of these people who I've always filled my time with work in one way or another. Like over the break, I was like, let me just see if I can make an app with Claude.
Okay.
And then I proceeded since the middle of December, we're sitting here, it's the middle of January. I've probably put 100 hours of extra time outside of work technically on making a personal finance app in Claude.
Oh, cool.
And it's like, I'm just, you could say I'm a workaholic. I think I'm mostly just a nerd, but that is how I will tend. I get really uneasy if it's just sitting around. I don't like it. And I know I'm weird that way. I know it's like it's something, it's good, but it's also I get obsessive and whatever.
Yeah.
Did the military help you to get your act together with habits so that you wouldn't waste your time on TikTok? I think about our boys that are lost, and it's like they can just get sucked into the vortex of TikTok. And it's like, should they go into the military? Even if they maybe have better prospects or something, should they,
Yeah. Well, I share that same feeling of wanting to work. I don't know how, for me, in my case, I don't know how much of it is intrinsic and how much of it is, ever since I left the military and went into college, I felt like I was playing catch up. So I didn't get to college till I was 25. And so I'm surrounded by a bunch of and I was at Yale, it was all these overambitious, overachieving, Ivy League students. And I'm this old guy, relatively to them, and feeling like I had to work extra hard to catch up. And I've felt that ever since, of like, I have to work twice as hard to get to where I should have been had I not sort of squandered my teen years and my early 20s just screwing around. And so did the military definitely helped with self-discipline. I talk about this in Troubled, of learning the difference between motivation versus self-discipline, where I think motivation is overrated. Motivation is just a feeling of, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do it? And, waiting for motivation to strike will, you could be waiting forever for that. If you say, I'm only going to go to the gym when I feel motivated, you may never go, or you may go once a week and you're not going to stick to your routine. Whereas self-discipline is
feelings are not real. They're fleeting. They're
Yes.
temporary. You will feel the opposite way you feel now. That's guaranteed. So
yes. And self-discipline is not relying on feelings. It's, I have made this commitment to myself, this promise to myself, and I'm going to do it regardless of how I feel. So I don't feel like going to the gym today, but self-discipline is, well, get your gym gear on. Let's go. You got to move. Same with writing or whatever your job, whatever your goals happen to be, of just sort of making incremental progress regardless of however you feel. And that was something I learned in the military, where initially the discipline came from the top down of drill instructors or commanding officers or whoever happens to be. They're telling you what to do, and then over time, sort of inculcated in us that here's what you need to do to be successful. Sort of taking small steps, good habits every day, and yeah, it was exactly what I needed at that point in my life, of learning all of the habits that I was not equipped with, that I had never learned up until that point. And that was one of the things that I was impressed with the other students. By the time I got to college, was a lot of those kids, they were raised by, helicopter parents, tiger parents, whatever, people who were like, you're going to study, you're going to do this. Here's, every minute of every day is scheduled for you. And I think there are, costs and benefits to that kind of life for a kid. Yeah. But weirdly, that was my life in the military, where every part of the day was structured. This day you're, spending your time cleaning your quarters. This time you're spent shining your boots. This time you're spent marching. This time you're spent this. And it's like, by the time you hit the bed at 10, 11 o'clock, whatever it is, it's like, wow, like I did a lot today. I had no time to do anything else, and I'm exhausted. And then you start over the next day, and you learn how much you can get done in a single day if, you are scheduled that way. And sometimes people will ask me, the question, should my kids go in the military? And I used to be more ambivalent about this. I guess I had that kind of, libertarian instinct of, if they want to, that's great. If they don't, don't coerce anyone to do anything they don't want. But, I've read enough stories. So obviously my own life is kind of a case study of this, of, it really helped me a lot. I was, kind of an aimless kid, and it, helped me to redirect my life. J.D. Vance, another famous case of this, of tough early life, and then he joins the Marines. I mentioned my friend Ed Lattimore, same thing. He joined the Army, National Guard, helped him to turn his life around. Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, I read his memoir, and this was kind of before he became, or started to become discussed as a potential candidate for 2028. But his early life was also extremely difficult. Single mom, and he was getting into a lot of trouble, and his mom kind of found ways to collect enough money to send him to a military boarding school, and he completely turned his life around, and now he's a governor, possibly in the running for president. And all of these cases, you had, young guys who were kind of unfocused, troublemaking, mischievous types, and then they go into this system that helps them to uncover their potential. So, I'm more leaning towards, if they have other options and they are self-driven, and I wouldn't want to, put them in a situation where they won't have enough time to pursue those talents or curiosities or whatever it is. But if they don't know what they want, and they're struggling, or they're kind of paddling in place, and they don't know what they want to do, then the military can help them. And weirdly, I've had a lot of conversations with people who tell me that they read my book, they gave it to their son, and their son reads it, and then next thing they know, they've enlisted. I'm like, I don't know what to say, sorry or congratulations, or
Yeah. as a parent, it's mixed feelings. And I'm generally pretty anti-war Ron Paul-ish. But I do, this is an aspect I fundamentally think that like the military is an endogenous necessity of a society, that every society has had defenders. Like we're not going to have a society without a military. Like that's just not going to be a thing. So I think I'm generally pretty impressed. The people I've met that have gone through the service, they've got some core stuff working for them that just seems like it's the rest of the culture has just thrown away.
Yeah, it is one of the few places where, that kind of old school discipline is, not only expected, but encouraged. And, I just will never forget just, being, I went from a place where there was a lot of, neglect. I was in these foster homes and all these kind of disorganized environments, very little oversight or authority, parental figures. And then suddenly, like extreme rigidity in the rules and the instructors. And it was just, complete shock to me. But, no, I understood what it was and I respected it and I admired it, and it gave people something to live up to, these ideals. And I joined in 2007. It was a different time, I think, where the training was, I hate, this is like, I'm starting to enter this phase where I talk and I see, I guess I sound like an old guy now. I'm reaching that point in life.
Like, oh my God, that was 20 years ago. Shit.
Yeah. And so I remember just, how things have changed, because at that point, this was like the peak of the war on terror. George Bush was still the president. And
in 2007, we're into the phase where Iraq feels like a quagmire too.
Yes.
It's not.
Afghanistan was still ongoing, and it was just like the training, everything was like very intense. And then kind of by Obama's second term, things had started to soften. And I remember in 2013, I was stationed in Germany, and one of my friends from back home where I grew up, I tried for years to get him to enlist, because I knew he was basically the kind of guy I was describing. He had some talent and some potential, but was just sort of stuck in a dead end job in our hometown. He finally enlists. We're 23 years old. So I'm stationed in Germany. And I know he's in basic training, and then I get a text from him on my phone, and I text him back. I'm like, "Aren't you supposed to be in basic training? Like, why are you texting me?" And he's like, "We get an hour of phone time for good behavior." So I'm like, "An hour of phone time? Like, we didn't get that." Like, and that was only 6 years had passed. But by that things I think
the coddling of the American mind came to basic training.
Yeah, kind of. Although my understanding is like now with the Secretary of War, I don't know, maybe things are changing and kind of reverting back to those more rigid standards. But I think regardless, it's still a good experience. It doesn't have to be the military. It could be sports. It can be, I don't know, is there still a Boy Scouts? But just something where there's a hierarchy and a structure, learning to respect competent authority and rules, and learning to get along with, like learning how to be a good follower, and then learning how to be a good leader, and all those kinds of things. And you're forced to. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Is like so much of life is opt in, consent. Do you want to do this? Do you not? You can leave at any time. No one should ever feel unsafe, whatever. The military is like, you're doing this, or you get court-martialed and go to military prison. It's up to you. And, so.
It's like you've opted in to this somewhat indentured servitude style of setup where like you're for 7 or 8 years or whatever the tour. Is it 7 years? I think now
I haven't looked into it, but when I was in, it's you could sign up for 4 years or 6 years at a time. And you can renew your contract, assuming you're sort of in good standing. But yeah,
I last summer floated an idea. I called it the cultural bell curve. It's not especially interesting or unique necessarily, but what I basically, my basic argument was this. We have entered a period, we're sort of grappling with it now with Trump and the vibes shift, and like now you can say naughty things and people chuckle instead of getting deplatformed. But we're still fundamentally in an era in which like shame itself is like not supposed to be a thing. And what I argue is we've had like sort of 3 phases. first phase in human civilization looked kind of like this. If the vertical axis is social acceptability, with 0 being dead, A for acceptability, and we'll put the median middle here. So you have kind of like this, like sort of like a building that you get thrown off if it's not acceptable. So you're inside the norm, you're inside the tribe, and if not, you're thrown off the building. Not often. You're exiled, which is death, or you're literally killed. There's society still like this. So then, in response to that, at least in part, and then also sort of like left-wing utopian gobbledygook out of French salons, we entered a period that we're still sort of in, where it's like, no. It needs to be this. There is, everything's acceptable. Everything's acceptable. Yeah. In fact, even like the notion that there's differences of any sort is to be forbidden. And we can't say, for example, like, I don't know, marriage is good. In fact, like marriage before you have kids is better than otherwise. And most people would be happy getting married, having kids in that order. Like graduate high school, get married, have kids, have a job, the success sequence. That's all white supremacy. And I said, like, really, there's something like cultural bell curve that looks something like this. Really, there's kind of like I'll put like the line here, like normal, there's like a normal healthy. And I'm not saying like you're a bad person or you should be completely ostracized if you're somewhere in here. But there are things that like out here, like if you're like a no, you're into a box. So much of status and like these habits that we're talking about that are just like no duh. Like this was the stuff that was like the no duh that's called being an adult up until like 5 minutes ago. And now it's not clear to me if there's a mechanism, an institution that can play like a determinative role in reestablishing something like this that's actually healthy and not excessively oppressive. There'll be some oppressiveness. There'll be some like, oh, I'm kind of a freak and I really hate that people side-eye me. Too bad. Like you are though, you are. It's okay. You're not getting thrown off a building. You're not being put in jail for being gay.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think about like what constitutes healthy norms? These are all normative. They're all like judgment calls. Yeah. Like but they're not just individual judgment calls because you are in the society and you're looking at like what.
We live in a society. Yeah.
You live in a culture. There's a culture.
Yeah.
How do you? I know I've sort of monologued a little bit, but like I feel like your writing, your focus, your work is in this domain of like what is a psychological, sociological, healthy, normal thing that should be normal, should be venerated? What is the stuff that should be should be marginalized, should be said like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that?
Yeah, it's funny as you're describing this. I'm thinking about Emil Durkheim, who, again, he's a 19th century sociologist. He didn't put it in quite these terms, but my interpretation of it was that there does seem to be a law of conservation of morality in a society. And so Durkheim basically suggested that if you were to dismantle all of the moral norms, everything is okay, let your freak flag fly, everything's cool, all the old norms, completely discarded, it would be only a matter of time before people would fill that void with new moral norms. And I think we actually witnessed a version of that in our own culture. So you mentioned, like the old value was marriage is a good thing before you have kids. Well, now I think we've almost gone in the other direction where like you have to actually kind of glorify deciding to have a kid out of wedlock or not having a kid at all, or having living in a polycule instead of committing to a single person, or living casual, open, throuple, whatever. I had a conversation a while back with this, he was an editor of a magazine, and he was telling me how they had just ran a story of a woman who divorced her husband, started an and how happy she was with her life. And I asked him, would you run the other story like the reverse of this. So if there was a woman who had an OnlyFans, ditched that, met a guy she loved, committed, got married, and now was happy with this, would you run that story? And he said, absolutely not. We would never run that. And to me, this is like, what are the priorities? What are the values? Well, the value is essentially kind of undermining the old value. That's what's glorified now. That's what's praised. And so I think for a while we kind of took these old norms for granted of, we thought marriage was like the natural state of things, so it's okay to kind of poke fun at it or undermine it. We don't
Married
have to
with children.
Yeah, we don't have to reaffirm it. Like it's actually a very sort of fragile institution that requires constant sort of cultural reaffirmation and support from the society's elites, from ordinary citizens, from kind of pop culture, from everything to sort of reaffirm that this is actually you say like it's imperfect, but it's kind of the best way of all of the options. It's the least bad, or it's whatever. It's good relative to everything else. And now we're in this place where we can't really say that, or we have to actively attempt to dismantle it. Same with, drug use. Maybe it's not great to spend all day just stoned on the couch. Well, then it became, it's one choice among many. And then we got to this point where actually, drugs are pretty cool. And like, who are you to say? And maybe we should just decriminalize everything. And why are you being so uptight about it? And so we have that sort of regular like sequence of events. I remember, so I wrote this up in a piece for City Journal, but when I was in my PhD program, I did this study on the relationship between age and morality. And essentially what I found was that, and this was in multiple data sets, not just in the US, but in various countries around the world, that the older people are, the stricter their moral standards were for various kinds of moral infractions. So these were simple things like shoplifting. So you rate, how much do you disagree with shoplifting, or how objectionable do you find it? Same for, betraying a friend or disrespecting an authority, and even for things like political violence, spousal abuse, and child. Those ones in particular were surprising to me because what I found was even for something like child abuse and spousal abuse, you might expect older people to be more approving of that because of generational differences or whatever. The old, that's how they did it in the old days. But actually, what I found was that even for those kinds of infractions, younger people took a more permissive stance towards child abuse and spousal abuse. I controlled for political orientation.
That's really shocking.
I was stunned by this.
Like, it's shocking that it's not at least like level.
Yeah. Well, I would have thought, So for shoplifting and stuff, okay, young people, whatever, property is theft anyway, right? But for older people versus younger people on actual violence. So political violence, I predicted and found, okay, younger people are more supportive or less disapproving of political violence. But spousal abuse and child abuse, that one shocked me. And again, I controlled for political orientation, income, and education, still found basically the same result. I remember I presented these data as an academic conference, and it was a young female grad student who I could tell was sort of visibly uncomfortable with my findings here. And she replied, she asked a question during the Q&A session, and she said, this is interesting, but I noticed you didn't look at kind of modern moral concerns. You're looking at shoplifting and violence and betrayal and these kinds of conventional moral infractions. But what about modern moral concerns like climate change or racism, homophobia, Islamophobia? All this kind of stuff.
All the slogan-isms.
Yeah, but I think she helped me to understand, or at least to make sense of what we were seeing, because her question was essentially, like young people are more permissive about this stuff, but they care more about these other moral concerns. And in my view, that perfectly aligns with this idea of the law of moral conservation, where young people were told for decades now, hey, like, if you want to steal, like, who are you to judge? You want to do drugs, that's okay. Yeah, if it feels good, do it. Everything's fine. Complete non-judgmentalism. But I don't think that's sustainable in the long run. People still want to find ways to distinguish who's a good person, who's a bad person. They want to feel superior to others. They want to gossip. They want to spread rumors. They want to undercut their rivals. And so in the past, it might have been, oh, I heard so-and-so cheated on his wife. And now it's, I heard so-and-so used a racial slur in a group chat, or I heard so-and-so used an outdated term for women, or whatever it is. I heard so-and-so doesn't recycle. And that's the new way to signify your moral superiority. But your question is, the question, how do we decide what's right and what's wrong? And that one is a harder question to get to. So for me, a lot of my book is about, well, what's best for kids, right? Mm-hmm. Kids are small, they're vulnerable, they are completely powerless, obviously physically, but also politically.
Yeah.
There's that old, Marx had this distinction between a class in itself and a class for itself. And the class in itself is basically a group of people that are all mistreated in similar ways. And then a class for itself is once that class reaches class consciousness, right? Then like all of the workers recognize we're all being exploited by the capitalists. So now we can unite and agitate in favor of our interests. Children are kind of a class in themselves, but not a class for themselves. But they can never be a class for themselves because you don't want to give children political power. So it's up to adults to be good stewards, good parents, good guardians, caretakers, whatever. And so for me, often the sort of mechanism, the deciding factor of is this good, is it bad, is, how is this going to affect kids? If drugs are decriminalized, or if dissolving marriage is celebrated, or if we defund law enforcement, or empty out the prisons, or seize private property, or increase the number of mentally ill people on the streets, how is that going to affect kids? How's it going to affect families?
One of the things about your journey that's so sort of weird, is that in as a book, as like a set, as an experience of the way what you laid out in Troubled and your subsequent talking about and writing about it, is that you go through all of these life experiences of the abnormal relative to like this in, say, 1960. Mm-hmm. And it's not great. And then you end up, through luck and work and your tendency to nerd out and read books, probably, and end up at Yale, where all these people who had two parents and had an incredibly conservative life, small c conservative life, are celebrating all the things that you actually experienced. So talk about that. Talk about the dichotomy there of that young woman that was saying, well, what about all these other moral concerns? And okay, we don't care about marriage, but what about climate change? And I roll my eyes dismissively because I'm dismissive of that because of facts and physics. But and the total abstraction away from that. It's like actually being worried about marriage affects you and your future. But every one of these replacements is like a metaphysics. It's an abstraction. So, what's your message to that person from your own experience about what they think they want other people to like embrace?
Yeah, well, it's you're right that my experience in college was it was weird for a lot of different reasons. I grew up in foster homes, kind of various kind of fragmented families, kind of on the boundary of, there were various periods where I was either poor, working class, or kind of lower middle class. And then the military, that was the next environment I was in. And then I get to Yale, and this was in 2015, which was kind of I got to witness essentially the early days of what people would eventually call wokeness, or political correctness, identity politics, social justice. But really it was like woke. Actually, the term woke was still considered like a cool phrase in 2015, where
like Twitter was printing like the stay woke t-shirts, and
stay woke was like a cool thing. And then and this is kind of a status thing too, is like when it's a niche thing that only a few people know the definition of, it's trendy, it's fashionable. But then once I don't know, there's like the boomers start saying, the woke snowflakes, then it's like, well, we don't know what woke is. What are you even talking about woke? Then there was this game of like, woke just means being a good person, or there is no such thing as woke. But I saw a lot of this, and I just was mystified by a lot of the students, and not just the students, but the professors and grad students and people who came through these institutions. They were very dismissive of marriage, for example. But then when I would ask them, how were you raised? They would say, well, I was raised by two married parents. And then I would ask, well, how do you plan to raise your family? And they would say, well, this is kind of how I grew up and how I was raised, and I'll probably do this for my kids. But I think that society should evolve beyond this patriarchal, backwards institution. And to me, what I was hearing was, I benefited from this age-old structure that led me to study at a place like Yale. It's something like 90 to 95% of students at these institutions came from two-parent married families. They plan to carry this benefit for their own children, but then their official public position is, but people shouldn't do this. And to me, I compare it to like a medicine of like, yeah, like my parents gave me this medicine that made me successful. I'm going to give the medicine to my kids, but you shouldn't touch the medicine. Like, it's actually bad for you. You shouldn't do it. Stay away from this medicine that's helping us so much.
Medicine called books.
And I saw the same thing for, what I came to call luxury beliefs of defunding the police. And in those days, it was more sort of decarceration, decriminalizing all drugs. And in my book, I go through the survey data of who supported defund the police. The highest income Americans were always disproportionately in favor of defunding the police. Who supports decriminalizing drugs? Disproportionately wealthy and educated people are in favor of decriminalizing drugs. Same thing for lax borders, open borders, all these kinds of different luxury beliefs. Even the attribution of success to hard work versus luck. This was a weird one for me, but because I would almost expect that people who are successful, most of them actually do work pretty hard, and you would expect them to attribute it to hard work. But it's actually the higher up you go in terms of education and socioeconomic status, the more likely people are to attribute success to luck. Whereas people who are lower down the ladder, they are more likely to say success comes from hard work. And so all of these, and to me, this is a luxury belief. If you say, well, success only comes about because of these uncontrollable forces and things that are, very abstract systems, and so whatever you do doesn't matter, it's meaningless, then why would anyone ever bother to try to improve their own lives if it just comes down to pure luck? So yeah, over time, I came to be suspicious. I kind of cynical. A lot of these people, I think, were very preoccupied with how they looked to other people. They wanted recognition, validation. They wanted to be praised. They wanted to feel like they were compassionate, but they had never considered, what happens if these policies are actually implemented, or what happens if this idea takes hold in the culture. Sometimes I'll talk about how you could think about you could think about a kid who's raised in like an upper middle class family, two married parents, and all around this kid are hardworking adults. And then the kid looks at TikTok or Netflix or all the pop culture stuff, and they see that it's celebrating promiscuity and drugs and all this stuff. But in the kid's own life, they're seeing role models and people who are disciplined and successful. So they have kind of this counterbalance of what they're exposed to in terms of what I would think of luxury beliefs, and then the actual personal examples in their lives. But then if you think of a kid who grew up the way that I did, a lot of instability, not that many role models, absentee, neglectful kind of situations. And all you have is, the pop culture. You spend a lot more time, when I was a kid, it was more time kind of, listening to music or watching movies and that kind of thing. Whereas today, I think it's more so spent scrolling. But you're exposed to things that are actively attempting to, hijack your lower impulses.
Yeah, it's just hedonism or just depraved.
And that's all,
just garbage.
And that's all you're seeing. There's no counterbalance in your personal life. Then, it's not a surprise that, kids in those neighborhoods struggle. I mean, there are a lot of other reasons why they struggle, but that's definitely one of them. Is and the people who wield disproportionate influence on the culture. people who write movies, TV shows, make online content, they tend to be educated at, these
USC, NYU, Columbia.
these institutions that have a kind of ideological dogma. So
one of the things, when I talked to my mom about all the stuff that's gone off the rails in education and in higher ed and this cultural stuff, she's a third generation Sicilian, but the Sicilian remains strong. So she's always trying to, whatever I say to her, I'm going to get skepticism and the opposite. It just doesn't, no matter what. But one thing she says, which I think is kind of commonly held when you look at like, youth culture, older people will say, well, yeah, when I went to college, the professors were a bunch of like, Angela Davis, like literally types. And that's just being young and being like transgressive because you're adolescent and you're being dramatic. It's kids these days. We grow out of it. I don't think that that's what's true though in this case. In the case of the cultural shifts that you're talking about, we didn't grow out of it. I mean, maybe we're on the way to growing out of it, maybe, or at least someone is. Some of us are. But how do you think about transgressiveness as a phase in life that's just part of something like the bird leaving the nest versus, ideological sort of hijacking and like the replacement of God with like the worst form of like fake religion one could possibly concoct?
Wow.
Because it could be, you could look at like, in your book, you talk about how one of the things among the students at Yale, and maybe it was students in Yale literally, or maybe it was actually like you were referring also to maybe like studies but it was like comfort with was higher.
Yeah.
Like, are you, like the disgust response to things like, well, if a brother and sister were both sterile and there was no risk of impregnation or disease, would it be morally wrong for them to have intercourse? And it's like normal people would be like, well, that's absolutely hideous and disgusting, and I'm hardwired for a whole bunch of reasons to find it so. But like Yale students are like, that's an interesting question. I guess not. I can't think of a rational reason why that wouldn't be okay. So I guess not.
Yeah. Well, because it's this ethic of autonomy, the ethic of, two consenting adults, right? Like, who are you to say what's right or what's wrong? And so, it's it's funny. I'll sometimes point out that if you say marriage is a good thing, critics will say, yeah, but what about all the bad marriages? But if you say gay marriage is good, no one ever says, well, what about all the bad gay marriages, right? Like they never, because there are also, marriages with same-sex couples that tend to go bad. But the critics of heterosexual marriage would never criticize same-sex marriage, even though, it's two people, there are going to be problems and so on and so forth. But it's this extreme feeling of, well, if you have two people, and also I think that the transgressiveness, it probably adds something like, I know the rubes would think this is wrong. So here's how I show you that I'm not a rube, is telling you, well, there's nothing wrong with it. No one's being harmed by this. It's, and it makes you look interesting and sophisticated, and, it shows you that you're not easily bothered, I guess. But I noticed that same kind of logic was applied to so many other things, that, well, there's a great book. Michael Knox Barron wrote this book on WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the ruling class of America in the early 20th century. And he points out that even then, kind of in the Roosevelt era, a lot of WASPs, members of the Eastern establishment, they were kind of flirting with socialism. A lot of them were interested in what was happening in the Soviet Union. But he quotes a few of them who were interested in kind of left-wing politics. And the author writes something like, it is a question whether a high WASP ever supported a cause without some secret glee at the knowledge that that idea or movement would be abhorred by the vulgarians. In other words, a lot of American elites, even 100 years ago, would champion causes because they knew on some level that the plebs would be outraged by it, and it made them feel good to know, well, I'm so much better, so much more educated or sophisticated or different, so I'm going to rub their faces in the fact that I'm supporting this thing that they would be horrified by.
To come back to the question of like the construction of healthy norms, you know, one of the things that seems like has gotten lost, one thing that has happened is we are a more secular society. Like the people's attachment to any kind of religion has declined. There is like some upticks in the United States among Christians, but it's still like after such long periods of decline that we are in a real ebb as far as like faith in America and in the West, and the trend lines are not good. And a lot of people have talked about. I mean, we've talked about here, like, you know, out goes one morality, in comes another. We're in like a Nietzschean trap. Like God dies, and what we replace it with is like murderous guys with mustaches in Eastern Europe and South America, or completely crazy like eugenics adjacent ideas, or both then and now, like wacko stuff. Like just I have like my academic sort of type side, but my sort of default is a little more of like my Philly Jersey, like, well, that's just kind of a bunch of nonsense. What are you talking about? and is religion ultimately, do you think religion's the fundamental anchor of moral culture? I increasingly feel like it is, and it must be, and what we have to like get back to just basically like Christian morals. And I know that sounds like old moralizing and not, but most of the things we're describing have other terms like marriage, sacraments. They're like holy sacraments. They're things that we hold in esteem, and they're like, I recently rewatched The Godfather, and you know in the first one, you know, Michael Corleone gets sent to Sicily, and there's this great scene where he's courting this young woman who he marries and then is killed by the mobsters, and he walks into the frame with her, and then a gaggle of like Italian ants follow behind, and then two guys with guns. But it was like this classic courtship thing that was prudish and controlling, and required you to delay gratification of sex and all this stuff that's like totally lost. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, that was a better world. Yeah, this is so that's pretty good. Like we need to like reinstate like courting and shame. And I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but it does seem like that's part of the solution. Like we had these things, they worked, they got us here, and and we can unravel them quite quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think do you agree with that? Our peers, there's a rising like love of like resurgent Christianity among like right of center talkers.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that rising sensibility, or what? What do you think about that?
I mean, personally, yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm not a particularly religious person. I have a great deal of respect for it. And I'm with you in that, like, having rituals, having something that inspires you, something that's ennobling. And I notice, like, even with secular people, they still respect rituals, like, I mean, most of them anyway, like marriage, for example. Like even people who are non-religious, if they are inclined to get married, they still want the ceremony, they still want it to be officiated. And then with funerals as well, it's not like, oh, well, they're dead, like drag them out to the sidewalk for the garbage collection. It's, we need to have a ritual. We need to all pay our respects. And it's like, well, if you're a pure materialist, it's like the lights went out in this person and that's it. So why do we need to do anything? Right? Like,
Yeah,
we're
we
all
can
just
burn Uncle John for warmth.
yeah, we're all just, if we're all just molecules in motion, then why are you? But I think that speaks to something in most people, that there's this desire to respect relationships, sex, life, death, baby showers, the birth of a child, all this stuff. Like, we have this something within us that pulls us towards something higher. So no, I think it's great, the resurgence in religion. And is it required? I don't know. In some ways, I think, like, in like the grand scheme of things, religion was around. I mean, we've probably always had religion in some form or another since Homo sapiens have existed. But secular societies have only existed for 10 minutes, relatively speaking. And so sometimes, like, the social scientist in me is like, well, we got to continue the experiment before we know for sure. And it's like, let's go like a few hundred years and like run that and then see, like, is it actually the case? Because right now it seems bad, but you could also imagine, if we're having this is cliche by now, but the Crusades, or fundamentalism, or this, that, and the other. And if
Crusades were mostly awesome, at least the first. I'm pro Crusades, but that's
depends on where you're living.
That's for another conversation.
Well, it depends on where you're living and who's being affected by it, where you might have different opinion depending, right? But it depends on a lot of things, like where you are historically and how affected you or your loved ones are by it, where you may have different feelings about, so. Yeah, but I don't know if we can ever fully eradicate the religious impulse, and if there is not a way to channel it productively, then I think it does. Like, another sort of banal observation now is, like, it probably does get redirected into politics or into some weird kind of cult-like social movement, where people are required to. Like, I think it's sometimes like land acknowledgements as like this like religious impulse gone haywire, where sure. Like, who are you talking to? Like, who's satisfied by this? And to me,
Cherokee spirits.
Yeah, like, they're gone, and then like
they're gone. They also stole the land from the tribe they were battling with for hundreds of years.
Everyone in this room is like a super educated white person. So, like, why are you like what? It's all for your own ego and your own gratification, but you want to feel like a good person. You want to feel ennobled, and religion had a way of channeling that toward productive ends. And now it's but I have seen, like you'd mentioned, a lot of people on the right, there's this resurgence, and then younger people too, I've noticed.
Young men especially.
Yeah. And I think a lot of them, because sometimes there are criticisms of, it's just LARPing, it's just cosplay, like, they don't really. But I think, like, that actually misunderstands, like, human psychology of we're very good at having good ideas and not acting on them, like having an opinion but not acting on it. But if you act in a certain way, you do modify your opinion. So where it's, people think, it's the thought that comes first, then the behavior, but actually it's the reverse, where you do the behavior and then the thought will follow. So it's not like, I have to be motivated and believe in God before you start going to church or start participating in these rituals. It's when you go to church and participate in the rituals, you inadvertently convince yourself of its importance.
It's the cliche is fake it till you make it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the old, like, habits become virtues and character. They become who you are. Like, you can start with, I'm going, but I don't really feel it. I don't really know what is this, and then just keep going. It's a thing. It's like, I'm like, sort of, I've come back to my practice of my Catholic faith, and it's been that has been absolutely true for me. Like, in some ways, like right now, I've probably never felt in my practice of going to church the feelings I have during the process. Like, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and it was boring. It was just boring. I'm like a kid, and it's boring, and I don't like kneeling so much. And oh my gosh, the Stations of the Cross, this is going to be horrible. And then I'm sure part of it's aging. As we wrap up, your book is being turned into a movie. by two longtime friends of mine. So let's talk about that. How did this come about? How did you meet? How did it happen? Yeah. And we'll put links to, because Ted and Courtney are, together, you as a team, you're fundraising for the film. So we will actively make sure people know about that and promote it and share it, because I'm a huge fan. The more people that know about your story, the better. And a movie is a great way to do it. And your book is very much a narrative experience. It is something. It's like a page turner. But how did this happen? How did you end up with Troubled getting being on the way to the movie treatment?
Yeah, it was unexpected. I was surprised, happy to see that the book was successful. And so the book came out, I think, February of 2024. And then I think Ted and Courtney contacted me September, October, something like that year. And, they'd expressed interest in optioning the book for a film. And I thought, okay, well, let's have a conversation. And right away, I could tell that they understood the message of the book. And I thought it was relatively clear. Like in the era of social media and TikTok and everything, you have to spell things out. And I did that with this book I don't want this to be a mystery what this book is, right? Like, here's the point of the book. I say it in the preface, and then I say it again in the conclusion. And still, a lot of, supposedly smart critics who went to college still misunderstood the point of this book. But Ted and Courtney got it, and they understood it. And for multiple reasons, they could tell that this book was ostensibly about upward mobility, but really it was a commentary on the increasingly fragmented families in a lot of poor and working class areas in this country, and the dysfunction that you see on kind of both ends of the social spectrum of what's happening in foster care, what's happening in poor neighborhoods, but also what's happening on the other end, where the future ruling class is educated at these elite institutions, and they are actually being miseducated, and they are not having their preconceptions challenged, and they're entering the world and into positions of leadership with completely mistaken ideas of what's good for people, what will help people to flourish. And so we had multiple conversations. I flew out to California. We'd had a few discussions, and then finally, made this agreement, sold the film rights, and it's just a surreal feeling. I remember when I was in the process of writing Trouble, I thought, this is a messy story. In a book, are people going to be able to track what's happening? Because it's every other chapter, I'm in a different foster home, different family, different location. I lived with 10 different families throughout my childhood. And so I wondered, are people going to be able to track what's happening here? And then the military, and I'm in different locations there, and then Yale and Cambridge, and it was just a lot more going on than I had in my mind when I agreed to do this project. And then talked to Ted and Courtney, and they showed me kind of different versions of the screenplay, and I thought, wow, it's actually it works. It actually kind of works as a film. There are kind of you can never tell the whole thing, and converting a 300-page memoir into a 120-page screenplay, but the themes are there, the stories are there. It's true to the narrative and to what I'd experienced. So. Yeah, it's just surreal that anyone would think this should be made into a film, and seeing it on the big screen will be kind of indescribable.
I was trying to see, could I come up with some kind of Crazy Rich Asians flip title for you? It's not the opposite of Crazy Rich Asians, Asian/Mexican. What's the probably someone in the cast of that movie will end up playing you, would be my guess. Maybe.
I mean, so my understanding is they're going to want a child actor for the foster homes, and then kind of but the older actor will be late teens, early 20s. So
maybe
I don't know,
one of the kids.
Asians. Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Maybe they're old enough now. Enough time has passed.
Watch older movies, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's that actor. That's there's Timothée Chalamet. We didn't even know.
Yeah. No, I'm. I have no idea as far as casting. I mean, I've made the joke the other night of, as long as it's better looking person than me, someone more telegenic or whatever. But yeah, but honestly, it's surreal either way. Yeah, I don't even know like what my reaction will be to see like someone else who's not me but has my name and all that kind of stuff. I'd never really thought that this would happen. I mean, even writing the book, I thought like, wow, I can't believe I'm writing a book about this. And now to see the movie is just equally surreal, if not more.
You said, so you're in town promoting the project and talking to folks, and so we were at an event last night together, and you brought something up that I think is straight out of the book, but just that all your success, or maybe Ted brought this up, but like your success, you're going to the Ivy Leagues, to Yale, to Cambridge, best-selling author, scholar at a major think tank, living in New York City, that you'd give it all up to have the love of a family that you didn't have. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. So that is kind of the end of the penultimate chapter of Troubled. There's this moment where it's right after I graduated from Yale, and thinking about how far I'd come, but then I see my mom and my sister, and I think like because we're at this sort of family dinner, and I think like, yeah, I think I would give it all up, everything, because at that point I was on my way to Cambridge. I just got my acceptance letter, and I thought, this has all been surreal and interesting and exciting, but to just have had more family dinners, spend more time with my mom, with my sister, of just like not having so much instability, disrepair, dysfunction, uncertainty, all the stress that came along with it. And I spoke with this. I was at this event, and it was in New York, and this woman, I think she's probably in her 40s, and she said, "Oh, we read your book at a reading club, and when we got to that part, like half of the women were like, I don't believe him. Like, I don't, he's so successful, like, come on, you're not going to trade that away." And this woman's explaining this to me. She's like, "I couldn't believe that they were saying that," and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it, but I kind of can believe it. Like, if you're that kind of person who values name brand, education, job, status, money above all else, then maybe it is surprising to you that someone would give that up." But then when I talk to people who have lived through similar life experiences, they get it right away. I had this conversation with this kid a while back. He read my book, and we exchanged a couple emails. He just got an acceptance letter to Stanford. He's an 18-year-old kid, grew up not too far from where I did in California, single mom, really tough life. And he was like, my mom, she was so proud of me. I worked really hard, and, it was just her and I. We didn't have anyone else. And I got the acceptance letter to Stanford, but then I read that part of your book, and suddenly this feeling that I'd had in my mind that had never fully surfaced, you finally, you were able to help me articulate this, which was I would give up my acceptance letter to Stanford to have known who my father was and to have had a relationship with him. And I said, yeah, like, you get it, like, you understand, like, that you cannot compensate for lack of family, those early life experiences, attachment, relationships, with just trying to fill that void with more accomplishments and more success. And so, big point of the book, Troubled, is to understand that we should be focusing on what's happening before the age of 18 rather than after. Everyone wants to know about social mobility. How many of these underprivileged kids are graduating from high school, incarceration rates, college, all this stuff. But what I want to look at is, what is their early life experience like before they get to that point? Because so much of success rides on what's happening before that. What's the family like? What's the home situation like? What are the values? What are the habits that they're learning? And yeah, it was a hard thing to write that, honestly. That was one of the more vulnerable moments I felt. It was funny. The early chapters of the book, I hated writing because I felt so, you like a little kid, you're kind of powerless, being shoveled around. The middle and later chapters, the military chapters and stuff, like, those were easier to write. And, I'm successful and everything. And then by that point, I'm like, but how do I really feel about this? What was I thinking at that time? And then I had to be vulnerable again, and I almost didn't want to. Like, I wanted kind of the book to end on a high note, but that wouldn't have been honest. That's not what was going on with me. So, Yeah, it's which is not the same thing, by the way, as saying I regret getting an education, or it's
No.
something that I don't wish to have. It's better than not having it, and I'm grateful for it. And it's better for kids, regardless of their early life. If that's what they want to do, they should have the opportunity to go to college and get an education and whatever. But there's a lot we could do as a society, as a culture, to promote good lives for kids too.
I think that is the best possible place for us to end here on Dad Saves America. Rob, thanks for coming back. Thanks for being in person. It's always so much better that way. And here's to the next one.
Thanks, John.